Story 1. The bus was a kaleidoscope of color and noise, bursting with the laughter and chatter of excited children. I sat near the front, my heart swelling with pride as I glanced back at my students, each one a beacon of joy. We were headed to the Knoxville Zoo, a trip I had eagerly planned for weeks. It was a day meant for fun, for learning, and for creating memories. Yet there was an unsettling feeling gnawing at me, a whisper of anxiety that I couldn't quite shake off. As we pulled out of the school parking lot, I noticed Mr. Jenkins, our bus driver, glancing down at his phone. My stomach twisted. "Hey, Mr. Jenkins, everything all right back there?" I called out, trying to sound casual. He looked up, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "Just checking the route, Miss Thompson. Don't worry, I'm on it." He tucked the phone away, but my unease lingered. I had always found Mr. Jenkins to be a dependable driver, but seeing him distracted made me question everything. I forced myself to focus on the children, their laughter filling the air like music, hoping it would drown out my concerns. The bus took a scenic route, winding through tree-lined streets that shimmered with the golden hues of late morning. The children pressed their faces against the windows, pointing out landmarks and animals they spotted. "Look, a cow!" shouted Emily, her excitement contagious. I smiled, joining in their joy, but my gaze kept drifting back to Mr. Jenkins. He was humming softly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we passed a stretch of road that felt oddly deserted, I spotted a figure standing by the roadside, a man in a dark hoodie, his face partially obscured by the shadows of the trees. He seemed to be watching us intently. My heart raced. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "See what, Miss Thompson?" Luke, one of my more observant students, replied, his brow furrowed. "That man back there," I pointed, but when I looked again he was gone, swallowed by the landscape. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, a figment of my imagination. But the unease clung to me like a shadow. The chatter resumed, yet my mind was elsewhere. I leaned back in my seat, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I forced myself to engage with the students, asking them about their favorite animals. "What do you think we'll see at the zoo?" I asked, hoping to redirect my thoughts. "Monkeys. I want to see the monkeys," Clara shouted, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The other kids joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of enthusiasm. "Monkeys it is." I laughed, but the sound felt hollow. Deep down, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering on the brink of something I couldn't quite see. As we continued on our journey, a sense of urgency began to creep in. I glanced at Mr. Jenkins again, who was now adjusting the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. Was it just my imagination, or was there a flicker of tension in his shoulders? The laughter behind me faded as my mind raced with possibilities. Suddenly, the bus hit a bump, jolting everyone in their seats, laughter turning into startled squeals. "Whoa, that was a big one," shouted Luke, and the tension momentarily lifted as they giggled. I forced a smile, but I felt the weight of my worry pressing down. Then, just as I thought I could relax, I felt a sharp twist in my gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that this day, this simple school trip, was spiraling into something far more dangerous than I could comprehend. The laughter continued around me, but in that moment I sensed that we were being watched, not just by the children but by something far more sinister. With every mile we traveled, the bus felt less like a vessel of joy and more like a ticking time bomb. I had no idea then how right I would be. The roar of chaos enveloped me as the bus collided with the pickup truck, the violent sound tearing through the air like a jagged knife. I felt the world around me shift violently, the laughter and chatter of the children morphing into screams of terror. I gripped the seat in front of me, my heart racing as the bus careened off course. The smell of burnt rubber filled my nostrils, mingling with the sharp scent of fear. I could see the horror unfolding in slow motion, the faces of my students turning from joy to sheer panic. "Hold on. Everyone hold on," I shouted, my voice barely cutting through the cacophony. I looked around, taking in the wide eyes of the children, their innocence shattering before my eyes. I could hear a child wailing, "Miss Sarah, make it stop." But there was nothing I could do. The bus lurched violently again, sending a wave of fear coursing through every fiber of my being. I saw the driver, Mr. Jenkins, his face twisted in shock as he struggled to regain control. "Mr. Jenkins, steer. Steer." I yelled, but my words felt futile. The bus crashed into the pickup, metal screeching against metal, and then everything went dark. When I regained my senses, I was surrounded by a haze of dust and debris. The world was eerily quiet except for the distant wails of sirens. I blinked against the dim light filtering through the shattered windows. My heart sank as I scanned the interior of the bus, the reality of our situation crashing down around me. Children were slumped against their seats, some unconscious, others crying, their faces streaked with tears and fear. "Help! Someone please help us!" I shouted, my voice cracking. I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain shooting through my body, and stumbled toward the back of the bus where a group of children huddled together, trembling. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, trying to sound calm though my heart raced. A little girl named Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide and glistening. "Miss Sarah, I can't find Lily," she cried, panic rising in her voice. "Stay here, Emily. I'll find her," I assured her, my heart sinking further. I squeezed past the seats, the wreckage a maze of twisted metal and broken glass. Every step felt like an eternity, the cries of children echoing around me. I finally reached the front of the bus, where Mr. Jenkins lay slumped over the steering wheel, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. "Mr. Jenkins," I shouted, shaking him gently. "Can you hear me?" He stirred but didn't respond. My heart raced as I looked outside. The scene was a nightmare. Emergency responders were rushing toward us, their faces grim and focused. I could see the flashing lights of ambulances illuminating the chaos, a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere surrounding us. "Miss Sarah." It was Tom, the father of one of my students. His face was etched with terror as he rushed toward the bus, his eyes frantic. "Where's Lily? Is she okay?" I'm not sure. I'm trying to find her." I called back, my voice strained. I felt a surge of guilt wash over me. If only I had done something, anything, to prevent this. As Tom pushed past the emergency personnel, I could see his desperation growing. "Lily! Lily!" he cried, his voice cracking like broken glass. The sight of him sent a shiver down my spine, the weight of the situation crashing over me like a tidal wave. The medics began pulling out the injured, the cries of the children merging with the sirens in a haunting symphony of despair. I watched in horror as they pulled lifeless bodies from the wreckage, and my heart sank further. "Please God, let her be okay," Tom murmured, his voice barely audible above the chaos. I could see the fear etched in his face, the sheer agony of a father's worst nightmare. "Tom, we're going to find her. I promise," I said, my voice trembling. But deep down I was terrified of what I might find. The air felt heavy with grief, and I could sense the darkness creeping in, wrapping around us like a suffocating shroud. As the medics continued their work, I felt a sense of helplessness wash over me. I wanted to scream, to shake the world awake and demand that this nightmare end. Instead, I stood there, frozen in place as the reality of our situation slowly began to sink in. The air in Knoxville felt heavy, thick with grief and unanswered questions. As I walked through the community center, I could see the familiar faces of parents, teachers, and friends, all gathered to mourn the loss of 5 lives, 3 of which were children from our school. The atmosphere was somber, a stark contrast to the laughter that had filled the bus just a day before. I clutched my coat tightly around me, not because of the chill in the air, but because of the overwhelming sense of guilt that weighed down on my chest. "Sarah," a voice called out, breaking through my spiral of thoughts. It was Tom, the father of one of the little girls who had been on the bus. His eyes were red and I could see the pain etched on his face. I knew he was looking for answers just as I was. "Tom," I replied softly, not entirely sure what to say. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Sorry doesn't cut it, Sarah," he snapped, his voice breaking. "You were there. You saw it all. You should have done something." I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks. "I didn't think." "Exactly," he interrupted. "You didn't think." Mr. Jenkins was distracted. "I saw you notice him, and yet," I took a step back, feeling the weight of his accusation. "I couldn't have known it would lead to this. None of us could have." His eyes softened for a moment, but the anger still simmered just below the surface. "You're right. None of us could have known. But you knew he was distracted. You should have said something. You should have made sure those kids were safe." The tension between us hung thick in the air, and I could feel the eyes of other parents and teachers on us. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I had brushed it off as a minor issue in an otherwise enjoyable outing. But deep down I knew he was right. I had let my guard down. As I turned away, my heart sank. I needed to find out more about Mr. Jenkins, to understand how he could have been so reckless. My mind raced back to the figure I'd seen on the roadside, the one who had watched us pass with an intensity that felt unsettling. Who were they? Did they have something to do with the crash? "Sarah." Detective Blake's voice cut through my thoughts as he approached, his expression serious. "I need to ask you a few questions about the trip. Anything you can remember about the driver could be crucial." "Of course, Detective," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. Mr. Jenkins seemed distracted. I saw him looking at his phone a couple of times. Did you notice anything else? Anyone else on the road? Someone who might have seemed out of place. His eyes bore into mine, searching for clues. I hesitated, replaying the trip in my mind. There was a figure standing by the road as we passed. They were just watching. I thought it was odd at the time, but I didn't think much of it. Do you remember what they looked like? Anything distinctive? Blake pressed his notepad ready. No, I don't remember any details. It was just a flash, you know? I sighed, feeling the frustration rise in me. I was focused on the kids, on making sure they were having a good time. Thank you, Sarah. It's important. If you think of anything else, please let me know, he said, his voice softer now. As Detective Blake walked away, I felt a knot in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this accident than met the eye. I needed to dig deeper into Mr. Jenkins' life, his past, anything that could shed light on why he had been so careless. But how? Feeling overwhelmed, I stepped outside for some fresh air. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, but the beauty of it all felt distant, muted by the grief surrounding me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts, hesitantly tapping on Mr. Jenkins' name. I needed to confront him, to understand what had happened. But deep down, I feared what I might discover. I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. The soft light of the morning filtered through the curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing aimlessly in the air. I couldn't shake the images from the crash that replayed in my mind like a broken record, screams, twisted metal, and the haunting silence that followed. The community of Knoxville was still reeling from the tragedy, and it felt as if I was caught in a storm of grief, guilt, and unanswered questions. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Detective Blake. Sarah, can you meet me at the station? I think we might have a breakthrough in the investigation, he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Of course, I'll be there in a few minutes, I replied, sliding into a pair of jeans and a hoodie. I grabbed my keys and headed out, my heart racing as I thought of all the unanswered questions swirling in my mind. When I arrived at the station, I found Blake in a small conference room, poring over a pile of papers. He looked up as I walked in, his expression serious. Thanks for coming. I've been reviewing witness statements and something caught my attention. Is it about Mr. Jenkins? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. A witness claims to have seen Jenkins arguing with someone just before the crash. They described a shadowy figure, someone they couldn't quite identify. This person was intense, almost threatening. My stomach churned at the thought. Do we have any leads on who this figure might be? Not yet, but we're looking into it. I need your help though. I know you were close to the kids, and I was hoping you might have heard something, anything that could connect Jenkins to this figure. I racked my brain, trying to remember any conversations, any whispers from the students that might shed light on this mystery. I don't know. The kids were just excited about the trip. They didn't say much about Jenkins other than how nice he was. Blake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What about Tom? He's been digging into this too. He might have some leads, especially since his daughter was involved. I sighed, frustration bubbling to the surface. I can't believe this is happening. Tom deserves answers, and so do the families of the other victims. What if Jenkins was hiding something? What if he knew more than he's letting on? We'll find out, Blake reassured me. But it's vital that we tread carefully. If this was more than just an accident, we need to know who else is involved. As we spoke, my mind drifted back to the day of the crash, to the mysterious figure I'd seen by the roadside. I could still picture the way they stood there, shrouded in shadow, watching us pass. Do you think it's possible that this figure has a connection to the kids? Blake raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Maybe one of the children knew them. I was thinking about the way they all talked. There were whispers about Jenkins being more than just a bus driver. As a teacher, I overheard a lot of things. They looked up to him. He nodded, considering my words. That's something we need to dig into. I'll talk to Tom. If there's a connection, we need to uncover it fast. Just then, the door swung open and Tom walked in, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with determination. I need to know what happened, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I can't rest until I find out the truth. Tom, we're gathering information, Blake replied, gesturing for him to sit. We've heard rumors about Jenkins arguing with someone before the crash. We're trying to figure out who that person is. Tom's expression hardened. I don't care about rumors. I want facts. My daughter is gone, and I refuse to let this go until I have answers. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. We're working on it, Tom. We'll find out what happened. I promise. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of hope in his eyes. Do you think she knew something? Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have? I don't know, I replied, my heart aching for him. But if there's anything we can do to help, we'll do it together. Together? He echoed, a flicker of determination igniting in his gaze. We'll find out what really happened that day. As we sat there, united by our grief and resolve, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something much darker than we could ever have imagined. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and the truth was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for us to uncover it. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desolate street where the bus crash had occurred. I stood there, my heart aching as I replayed the events of that fateful day in my mind. I had felt it, the gnawing sensation that something was terribly wrong, but I dismissed it. Now the weight of guilt pressed down on me like a heavy fog. The air was thick with grief, and I could almost hear the echoes of laughter from the children who would never return. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the messages I had exchanged with Mr. Jenkins in the days leading up to the crash. My fingers trembled as I read the last few texts that illuminated a darker side of the man I thought I knew. Sarah, I can't talk right now. It's complicated, one message read. His response was cryptic, filled with an urgency that I had overlooked at the time. I felt a chill run down my spine. What had he been involved in that required such secrecy? I decided it was time to confront him. I drove to his house, my heart racing with a mix of fear and anger. As I approached the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I hesitated, my hand hovering above the doorbell. Should I walk in? Instead, I knocked softly, the sound echoing in the stillness. Mr. Jenkins? I called out, my voice barely a whisper. There was no response. I pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The air was stale, filled with a sense of abandonment. I moved cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight. Mr. Jenkins? I tried again, louder this time. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Who's there? I turned to see him standing in the living room, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah, I said, my heart pounding. I need to talk to you. He looked disheveled, his clothes wrinkled and his hair unkempt. I don't have anything to say, he stammered, backing away from me. Please, I just want to understand what happened. What were you involved in? I pressed, stepping closer. He shook his head, looking like a cornered animal. You don't know what you're asking. You don't understand. Then help me understand. I found your texts. They said you were being blackmailed. By who? His gaze dropped to the floor, shame and fear etched across his face. I can't. If I tell you I could what? Get hurt? You think I care about that right now? I felt my frustration boiling over. You're the reason 5 people are dead. Don't you want to do something about it? His eyes widened, a flicker of realization crossing his face. You think I wanted this? I didn't have a choice. Then tell me, who is it? Just then the phone buzzed on the coffee table, cutting through the tension. He glanced at it, his face paling further. I can't, he whispered. If I talk, they'll come for me. They've already threatened me. Who? I demanded, my voice rising. Who's threatening you? I can't say, he stuttered, his eyes darting toward the window. They said if I went to the police, they'd hurt my family. I let out a frustrated sigh, my mind racing. This was a dead end. I needed to find Detective Blake. He would know what to do. Mr. Jenkins, you have to trust me. There's still a chance to make this right, I urged, but he simply shook his head, retreating further into the shadows of his home. I turned to leave, my heart heavy with the weight of the truth I had yet to uncover. As I stepped outside, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the street where so many lives had been shattered. I pulled out my phone, dialing Detective Blake's number with trembling fingers. Blake, he answered, his voice steady. What's going on? I need to meet you. No, it's about Jenkins. He's hiding something dangerous. Where are you? He asked, the urgency in his tone matching my own. Just outside Jenkins' house. I'll be waiting. I hung up, glancing back at the door before I made my way to my car. The pieces were starting to come together, but the truth was still clouded in mystery. I could feel it. The key to unraveling this chaos was closer than I realized, but I had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. The air in the precinct felt thick with tension as I leaned against the cold metal desk, staring at the evidence board covered in photographs and notes, each piece a testament to the tragedy that had unfolded. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth lay just beyond my grasp, tantalizingly close yet maddeningly out of reach. As I studied the faces of the victims, I felt the weight of their families' grief pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I had to find answers not just for them but for myself as well. Detective Blake. A voice broke my concentration. It was Officer Daniels, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. You might want to see this. What do you have? I asked, pushing myself off the desk and following him into the small interrogation room, my heart racing. He handed me a stack of papers, a report from the lab. We found something on Mr. Jenkins' phone that we hadn't seen before. It looks like he had been texting with someone in the days leading up to the crash. The last few messages are disturbing. I took the papers, scanning the messages. My stomach twisted as I read the threats, the desperation in Jenkins' words. He was terrified of someone who had a vendetta against him. This could be the break we need, I muttered under my breath. Who is this person? Daniels asked, leaning in closer. We need to find them before it's too late. I nodded, already piecing together the fragmented clues. I think it might be related to that mysterious figure we saw near the crash site. The one Jenkins was arguing with. If we can track them down, we might find out what really happened. Just then the door swung open and Tom burst in, his face pale and determined. Detective, I need to talk to you. It's about my daughter. I motioned for him to sit, concern washing over me. What is it, Tom? I found something in her room, he said, his voice trembling. A diary. She mentioned meeting someone who was supposed to help her with a project at school. But it's more than that. She called him a friend. His friend. I think he might be the same person you're looking for. My pulse quickened. Do you know where she met him? Just down by the park. She said he was a good guy, but I don't like the way she wrote about him. It felt off, he said, his eyes widening in fear. What if she was involved in this? What if she knew something? Tom, we need to get that diary. It could hold the key to everything, I urged, trying to keep my voice steady. We can't afford to overlook anything right now. He nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. I'll get it. But please, you have to promise me that you'll find out what happened to her. I can't lose her too. As he left, I turned back to Daniels, my mind racing. We need to move fast. If Jenkins was being blackmailed and if Tom's daughter was involved, we might be looking at something much bigger than an accident. Do you think she was in danger? Daniels asked, his brow furrowed. I can't ignore the possibility. This isn't just about the crash anymore. This is about revenge, and we need to stop it before it spirals out of control, I replied, my voice firm. Before we could gather more information, my phone buzzed sharply on the desk. The message flashed on the screen, a tip-off about the mysterious figure. We have a lead, I said, adrenaline surging as I grabbed my jacket. Let's move. As we drove to the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against the clock. I envisioned the moments leading up to the crash, the chaos, the screams, and the lives shattered in an instant. The community was still reeling, and it was up to us to restore some semblance of order. When we arrived, the park was eerily quiet, the playground empty. I scanned the area, my instincts screaming that we were close. Split up. If you see anything suspicious, call it in, I instructed Daniels, my heart pounding in anticipation. I took a deep breath and headed toward the small gazebo where shadows lurked. As I approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was off. I felt it in my gut. And then in the distance, I saw a figure emerge, cloaked in darkness. Stop right there. I shouted, adrenaline surging as I raced toward them. But before I could reach them, the figure turned and bolted, disappearing into the trees. Damn it. I muttered, frustration boiling over. We can't let them get away. But as I sprinted after the shadow, I knew deep down that this chase was only the beginning. The truth was out there, tangled in a web of lies and betrayal, and I was determined to unravel it before it was too late. Story 2. The excitement in the air was palpable as I stood outside the school, watching my classmates gather for the camping trip to Big Bear Lake. The sun was bright, painting the sky in a brilliant blue that mirrored our bubbling enthusiasm. I could hear snippets of conversations all around me, plans for roasting marshmallows, ghost stories to tell around the campfire, and the inevitable jokes about getting lost in the woods. I tightened my grip on my backpack, the weight of it a comforting reminder that I was ready for adventure. Jake. Over here. Mia's voice cut through the chatter, and I turned to see her waving at me. Her brown hair fluttered in the breeze, and her smile was infectious, though I could see a hint of anxiety in her eyes. I made my way over to her, feeling a surge of camaraderie. Are you ready for this? I asked, trying to mask my own nerves with confidence. I guess so, she replied, biting her lip. I just hope the weather holds up. Come on, it's going to be fun. We'll be fine, I reassured her, though a small part of me wanted to believe her worries were unfounded. The local ranger had warned us about unpredictable weather, But what could possibly go wrong on a sunny day like this? Kyle strutted over, his usual bravado on full display. What's the matter, Mia? You scared of a little rain? He laughed, slapping me on the back. This is going to be epic. Just wait until I show you how to start a fire with just 2 sticks. Mia rolled her eyes but couldn't help but smile. You mean until you set your hair on fire, right? Everyone laughed and I felt my nerves settle. We boarded the bus, the chatter escalating to a crescendo of excitement. I took a seat by the window, watching the scenery change from city streets to winding roads flanked by towering trees. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond our bubble of happiness. When we arrived at Big Bear Lake, the beauty of the place took my breath away. The shimmering water reflected the surrounding mountains, and the scent of pine filled the air. We quickly unloaded the bus and set about establishing our campsite. I took charge, directing everyone on where to pitch tents and how to set up the campfire area. Once everything was in place, the ranger approached us, his expression serious. Listen up, folks. The weather out here can change in an instant. Make sure you stay close to the campsite and keep an eye on the sky. If anything seems off, don't hesitate to take shelter. His warning sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to appear calm. We've got this, right? I said to Mia and Kyle, who were nearby. Yeah, sure, Kyle said with a dismissive wave. What's the worst that could happen? As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, the flames dancing and casting flickering shadows on our faces. Stories flowed freely, each one more outrageous than the last. I told a tale of a ghost that haunted these very woods, and everyone leaned in, eyes wide with intrigue. But as the laughter faded and the darkness deepened, an uneasy feeling settled over me. I glanced at Mia, who was staring into the fire, her expression distant. Hey, you okay? I asked, nudging her gently. I don't know. I keep thinking about what the ranger said, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't worry about it. We're here to have fun, I said, trying to sound more convincing than I felt. The stars twinkled above us, but beneath their beauty, I sensed a storm brewing, not in the sky but in the air around us. Kyle, ever the daredevil, leaned back and stretched his arms. What's the worst that could happen? A little rain won't stop us. He laughed, but I noticed the way his eyes darted toward the tree line, as if he were already seeking out his next adventure. As the fire crackled and the night grew colder, I couldn't shake the feeling that our weekend was about to take a turn we weren't prepared for. The laughter continued, but my heart raced with a sense of foreboding, a whisper of warning that lingered just out of reach. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking the flimsy walls of our tents as I struggled to keep my flashlight steady. I could barely hear anything over the cacophony of raindrops slamming against the fabric above me. I could feel my heart racing, not just from the fear of the storm but from the growing tension among us. Jake, we need to do something. Mia's voice cut through the chaos, laced with panic. I could see her silhouette against the flickering light of the fire pit we had set up earlier. It was barely hanging on, the flames flickering wildly, desperate for oxygen. I know. We just need to stay calm. I shouted back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Everyone get inside your tents. We'll ride this out together. But even as I said it, I could see Kyle, his face illuminated by the flashlight's beam, looking defiant. He had always been the reckless one, the daredevil of our group. This is nothing. I'll be fine out there. I'm not scared of a little rain. He turned on his heel, ready to charge into the storm. My stomach dropped. Kyle, don't be stupid. You can't go out there. It's dangerous. Dangerous? Come on, Jake. You're just being lame. I can handle this. He waved me off dismissively, his confidence infuriating and terrifying all at once. Mia, hold him back. I called, desperate to stop him. But she was too busy looking terrified, her eyes wide. Please, Kyle. Just stay with us. You don't know what could happen. I'll be back before you know it, he yelled over his shoulder, already disappearing into the darkness. I felt a knot tighten in my chest as the wind howled louder, drowning out any chance of convincing him. Mia, we can't let him go alone, I said, scrambling out of my tent. We have to get him back. Jake, it's too late. He's already gone. Her voice trembled and I could see tears glistening in her eyes, reflecting the chaos around us. I took a deep breath, trying to focus. I have to go after him. Stay here, please. If he gets hurt, he'll need help. Don't be reckless, Jake. The storm is too bad. Ignoring her protests, I stepped out into the tempest. The rain slapped against my skin, cold and unforgiving. I squinted into the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of Kyle, but all I saw was a wall of rain and shadows. Kyle? I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the wind. Kyle, where are you? There was no response, just the relentless pounding of the storm. I pushed forward, my feet slipping on the muddy ground, adrenaline pumping through my veins. What if I lost him? What if something happened to him out here? I continued to call for him, my voice growing hoarse. Kyle, come on, man. This isn't funny. But the only answer was the roar of the storm. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, trying to remember the last place I saw him. Then through the chaos I heard it, a faint sound, a laugh. It was unmistakable, Kyle's trademark sound that always echoed with arrogance. I followed it, desperate to reach him. Kyle, I swear if you're messing around My words were cut off by a sudden flash of lightning, illuminating the forest for a brief moment. I froze, catching sight of what looked like Kyle's figure. He was standing against a tree, arms raised in a mocking pose, his hair drenched and wild. See, Jake? I told you it was nothing, he shouted, laughter ringing out, but it was laced with an edge of bravado that felt deeply unsettling. Get back here. I yelled, the fear clawing at my insides. The storm was growing stronger and I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. You need to come back with me. This isn't a game. But before I could take another step, a deafening crack of thunder reverberated through the air, and I saw him stagger, his laughter fading. The storm was no longer just a nuisance. It was a monster, and it was hungry. Kyle? I shouted again, panic rising in my chest. I took a step forward, heart racing, but something deep inside me whispered that this was more than just a storm. It felt like a reckoning, and I was fighting against the tide. The last thing I saw before the world exploded into chaos was Kyle's scared face, the bravado evaporating as realization dawned upon him. And then the darkness swallowed everything. The dawn light filtered weakly through the trees, casting an eerie glow over the campsite, which lay in disarray after the storm's fury. My heart raced as I struggled to shake off the remnants of sleep, the weight of anxiety pressing down on me. I glanced around at the other campers, their faces etched with worry. Kyle had yet to return, and the sinking feeling in my stomach deepened with each passing moment. Jake, we need to find him. He could be hurt. Mia's voice trembled beside me, her wide eyes scanning the forest. I could feel her anxiety radiating off her, a palpable force that threatened to engulf us both. I know, Mia. We will, I replied, forcing calmness into my voice. Everyone gather around. I called out to the rest of the group who were milling about, still trying to comprehend the chaos of the night. We need to organize a search party. Kyle might be lost out there and we can't waste any more time. As I spoke, I could see the fear in their eyes. We were all still reeling from the storm, but now was not the time to falter. I turned to Mia, who stood biting her nails, a habit that had worsened since the storm. Stay close to me, all right? We'll find him together, I reassured her, though I felt the tremor of uncertainty in my own heart. We split into small groups, each taking a different direction. I led one with Mia and a few others, moving cautiously through the underbrush, the ground slick and treacherous from the rain. Each snapping twig beneath our feet felt like an echo of our fear, a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. Jake, Mia whispered, her voice barely above the rustle of leaves. What if something happened to him? What if he got hurt? Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and I could feel my resolve wavering. He's tough, Mia. He'll be okay, I said, though doubt gnawed at me. Just keep looking. As we moved deeper into the woods, the silence was oppressive. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional call of a distant bird, a stark contrast to the riotous storm we'd endured just hours earlier. Each minute felt like an eternity. I couldn't shake the image of Kyle laughing and challenging me to keep up during our hike the previous day. How could he just disappear like this? After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a clearing. My heart dropped when I saw a familiar sight, Kyle's backpack, soaked and abandoned. I hurried over, kneeling beside it, my hands trembling as I unzipped it. Inside were his clothes, drenched and muddied, but no sign of him. This can't be happening, I muttered, the weight of despair crashing down on me. We have to keep searching. He has to be out there somewhere. Mia knelt beside me, her voice breaking. Jake, what if he didn't make it? What if he... She couldn't finish her thought, and I felt a chill run down my spine. No, we can't think like that. I snapped, more harshly than I intended. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed. Kyle is strong. He's out there and we need to find him. But even as I said it, a part of me feared it wasn't true. We regrouped with the others, faces pale and eyes wide. What did you find? One of the girls asked, her voice quivering. Just his backpack, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. We need to widen our search area. He could have wandered further away. As we prepared to move again, a sense of dread settled over the group. The sun was rising higher, but it did little to warm the chill that wrapped around us, an ominous reminder of the storm that had ravaged our night. I glanced at Mia, who was staring into the distance, her expression caught between hope and hopelessness. "Jake," she said softly, "what if he doesn't come back?" I clenched my fists, frustration boiling within me. "We can't give up. Not now." But as I said it, I could feel the cracks in my own resolve. The uncertainty hung heavy over us, each minute dragging on, filled with worry and the haunting fear that we were losing our friend. We set off again, pushing through the underbrush, calling his name, hoping that somewhere out there, Kyle could hear us and would come running back, laughing at our panic. But as the minutes turned to hours, the weight of reality began to settle in, and with it, the fear that maybe we wouldn't find him after all. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the campsite as we gathered once more, our faces drawn and weary from the relentless search for Kyle. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm that had ravaged our weekend. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, a sensation that I couldn't shake off. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was dread. "Jake." Mia's voice broke the heavy silence as she approached me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What if we don't find him?" I looked at her, searching for words to reassure her. "We will find him, Mia. We have to believe that." But even as I said it, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. I should have stopped him. I should have done something. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and I could see the guilt etched on her pale face. "Mia, you can't blame yourself. Kyle made his own choices." I placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to convey some semblance of strength. "We'll keep looking. We're not giving up on him." Just then, the crackling of the radio interrupted us. A voice came through, distant but clear. "This is Search Team Alpha. We found a body in a ravine about a mile from your last location. Over." My heart dropped. The words reverberated in my ears like a death knell. I turned to Mia, whose face had gone completely white. What did they say?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "They found a body," I replied, my throat dry. "It could be Kyle." A chilling silence enveloped the group as we processed the news. The others had been huddled together, but now they were scattered, each lost in their thoughts. I could see the fear in their eyes, the reality of our situation crashing down around us. "I can't," Mia started, her hands trembling as she covered her face. "I can't do this anymore." I stepped forward, pulling her into an embrace. "You're not alone, Mia. We'll face whatever it is together." Still clinging to her, I turned to the rest of the group. "Listen up. We need to stick together. We can't let this tear us apart." Kyle's absence weighed heavily on all of us. The laughter we had shared just days before felt like a distant memory, replaced now by a suffocating silence. I could see Kyle's mischievous grin in my mind, his reckless spirit always pushing boundaries. "What if it is him?" one of the other students, Sarah, asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze, trying to muster the courage I didn't quite feel. "Then we'll honor him. We'll remember him for the good times and not just this." But deep down, I feared that our memories of Kyle would forever be tainted by the tragedy of this trip. Another radio crackle interrupted my thoughts. "We'll be sending a team to recover the body. Please remain where you are. Over." As the weight of those words settled over us, I noticed Mia leaning against a tree, her body shaking with silent sobs. "I should have gone with him," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I should have been there." I pulled away from her, kneeling to look her in the eye. "Mia, you can't think like that. You would have gone with him, but he wouldn't have listened. He was always so stubborn." "But I knew he was reckless," she cried, her hands balled into fists. "I could have stopped him if I had just tried harder." "Mia, we all knew," I replied softly, feeling the ache in my chest tighten. "But we can't change what happened. We can only learn from it." The words hung heavy in the air, an unspoken truth that we all had to face. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the campsite, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss wash over me. The rustling of leaves drew my attention, and I turned to see the search team approaching, their faces grim. My heart raced as they drew closer, each step echoing the uncertainty that filled the air. "Jake," one of the searchers called out. "We need to talk to you." I exchanged a glance with Mia, who stood frozen beside me. The moment felt surreal, as if time had slowed to a crawl, and all I could do was brace myself for the truth that lay ahead. The search team's arrival felt surreal, like a scene pulled from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The sound of their boots crunching over the debris of our camp sent shivers down my spine. I stood there, my heart pounding against my rib cage, as they approached us with solemn expressions that told us everything we feared. "Hey Jake," one of the search team members called, his voice steady but laced with an underlying sadness. "We need to talk." I exchanged glances with Mia, whose face was pale and drawn. I could see her hands trembling slightly at her side. We both knew what this meant. The sinking feeling in my stomach intensified as the search team member led us a little ways away from the group. "Listen," he said, taking a deep breath. "We found a body." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt like I was underwater, the reality of the situation closing in around me. I could barely process the words. Is it Kyle?" I managed to choke out. He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "Yes. We found him in a ravine not far from where you were camping." "I'm sorry." The world around me blurred. I could hear Mia's quiet sobs in the distance, but it felt like I was in a vacuum, utterly detached from reality. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but all I could do was stand there, numb and hollow. Kyle was gone. Just like that. My mind raced back to that moment when he had decided to wander off, brushing Mia's concerns aside like they were nothing. "We need to get you guys back home," the search team member continued, his voice gentle but firm. "We can help you pack up your things." I nodded absently, still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that my friend was dead. The weight of guilt settled heavily on my chest. If only I had insisted more, if only I had stopped him. As we stumbled back to the camp, I could see the sorrow etched into the faces of our classmates. Some were huddled together, whispering. Others sat apart, lost in their own grief. Mia was sitting on a fallen log, her face buried in her hands, and I felt an overwhelming urge to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But how could I? I was grappling with my own guilt. "Mia," I called softly, approaching her. "I'm so sorry." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "It's my fault, Jake. I should have done more to stop him. I should have—" "No," I interrupted fiercely. "You can't think like that. We all made our choices. We all knew it was dangerous." My voice cracked as I said it, but I needed her to hear me. Kyle was reckless. We all told him to be careful. He didn't listen. "But I didn't fight him hard enough," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I could have done something." I knelt beside her, feeling the weight of her despair. "Mia, blaming yourself won't bring him back. We have to remember him for who he was, not just this moment." She nodded slowly, but I could see the turmoil still swirling in her eyes. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't quite place. Was it anger, sadness, or something deeper? As we packed up our things, the whispers began. I could hear snippets of conversations around the campsite. "If only someone had stopped him," one voice said. "This could have been avoided," another chimed in. Tensions brewed beneath the surface, and I could feel the blame shifting amongst us like a dark, heavy fog. "Guys, we need to stick together," I said, raising my voice to cut through the murmurs. "This isn't going to help us. We need to focus on getting back home and honoring Kyle's memory." But as I looked around at my classmates, I could see the fractures forming. Anger, confusion, and grief were bubbling to the surface. I felt like the leader I was supposed to be, but everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The ride back was silent, broken only by the occasional sniffle or whispered conversation. I sat next to Mia, who had turned her gaze out the window, watching the trees blur by. I wanted to reach out to her, to remind her that we were in this together, but the chasm of our guilt felt too wide to bridge. As we neared home, I knew that this was just the beginning of our struggle. The weight of our choices, the memories of our lost friend, and the whispers of blame would haunt us long after we returned to our normal lives. But I also knew we had to find a way to heal, to remember Kyle not just for how he died, but for the laughter and the moments we shared. It was a daunting task, but it was the only way forward. The halls of our high school felt different upon our return, an oppressive weight hanging in the air. I trudged through the corridors, the laughter and chatter of students echoing around me like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. Kyle was gone, and the energy that once buzzed through our group had been replaced by a somber silence. As I navigated to my locker, my phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out to check the notifications. My heart sank when I saw the video. It was a clip from that fateful night, shared by a classmate. In it, Kyle stood in front of the camera, his cocky grin lighting up his face. "Jake, you're such a coward. Come on, man, don't let a little rain scare you." He laughed, the sound sharp and mocking, and my stomach twisted in knots as I watched the video play out. I couldn't escape it. The way he taunted me felt like a dagger. I felt the anger rise within me, but it was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming wave of sorrow. He had always pushed boundaries, but this was different. This wasn't just about bravado. This was recklessness that cost him his life. Jake. Mia's voice broke through my reverie, and I turned to see her approaching, her eyes puffy and red. Did you see that video? Yeah, I muttered, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. It's messed up. I can't believe he was like that right before everything went wrong, she said, her voice trembling. It's like he didn't even care. I felt a surge of frustration. He didn't care. He never did. I snapped, earning startled glances from passing students. He thought he was invincible and now he's dead. Mia flinched at my outburst and I immediately regretted my tone. I'm sorry, I said, lowering my voice. I can't wrap my head around it. I know, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I should have said something. I should have stopped him. A heavy silence enveloped us, and I could feel the guilt radiating off her in waves. Mia, it's not your fault. Kyle made his choices and we can't carry that burden. But deep down I felt the weight of my own guilt. I had been his friend, his leader, and I hadn't been able to save him. I thought about the video again, how it captured not just Kyle's reckless spirit but also the part of him that was always pushing us, daring us to do more, to live harder. Maybe we can use this, I said suddenly, an idea sparking in my mind. We need to do something to honor him, to make sure this doesn't happen again. Mia looked at me, confused. What do you mean? I mean, we could advocate for stricter safety regulations for school trips. Show them that we need to take this seriously, I explained, my voice gaining strength. If we can get the administration to see how dangerous it can be, maybe we can protect future students. She considered it for a moment. You really think they'll listen? They have to, I insisted. If they see that video, they'll realize how reckless things can get. We owe it to Kyle. Mia nodded, and for the first time since we returned, a flicker of determination sparked in her eyes. Okay, let's do it. But we need to be careful. I don't want to be seen as just trying to blame him. Of course, we'll frame it as a call for change, I reassured her. It's about making sure no one else goes through this. As we walked together to the main office, I felt a sense of purpose, a mission to give Kyle's memory some meaning. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice Mia withdrawing. She'd come to school, but her laughter was absent, and her eyes were clouded with sorrow. Then one afternoon she just disappeared. I texted her, called her, but there was no response. Panic gripped me as I retraced our steps back to the woods behind her house, a place we had often explored together. I called her name, my voice echoing in the stillness, but only silence answered me. Mia! I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. Please come back. But the woods swallowed my cries and I felt that same despair creeping in, that sense of losing someone once again. The memory of Kyle loomed over me, and I realized that the fragility of life was not just a lesson learned. It was a reality that could strike at any moment. As the shadows lengthened, I stood there, paralyzed by fear and regret, hoping against hope that I wouldn't lose another friend to the darkness that had claimed Kyle. Story 3. The morning of the school trip to the Bronx Zoo arrived, bright and buzzing with the chatter of excited students. I sat in the middle of the bus, sandwiched between my friend Sarah and a group of boys who were animatedly discussing their favorite animals. They were all so carefree, their laughter ringing in my ears like a melody. Yet, beneath their enthusiasm, I felt a twinge of anxiety knotting in my stomach. Emily, are you excited? Sarah asked, nudging me with her elbow. Her smile was infectious, but I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like a shadow. Yeah, totally, I replied, forcing a smile. I don't know, I've heard some weird things about the zoo lately. I glanced out the window, watching the cityscape blur by, my thoughts spiraling. It wasn't just the zoo, it was the idea of being surrounded by animals, creatures who lived by instincts I couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the bus rolled closer to the zoo, my heart raced. The towering gates loomed ahead, and I could hear the distant sounds of animals calling to each other. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn and cotton candy, a stark contrast to the anxiety swirling within me. I felt Sarah's hand squeeze mine reassuringly. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll see the lions and tigers and maybe even feed the giraffes, she said, her excitement palpable. Yeah, fun, I echoed, trying to match her enthusiasm. But deep down, the knot in my stomach tightened. Once we disembarked, our group was herded together by Mr. Thompson, our history teacher, who was overly enthusiastic about the trip. All right, everyone. Let's stick together and have a blast. Remember, we're here to learn, he shouted, waving his clipboard like a flag. As we walked through the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sun beat down on us and the crowd buzzed with energy, but a strange chill ran down my spine. I found myself gripping Sarah's arm tightly as we made our way toward the first exhibit. "Look, there's the monkey house," she exclaimed, pulling me along. I forced a smile, trying to enjoy the day, but my mind kept wandering. I noticed a few zookeepers talking in hushed tones, their expressions serious. "What do you think they're talking about?" I whispered to Sarah, nodding in their direction. "Probably just zoo stuff," she shrugged, dismissing my concerns. But I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, a nagging feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. As we moved from exhibit to exhibit, the excitement of my classmates began to wear on me. I couldn't focus on the animals, my mind was too busy racing with thoughts. I overheard a zookeeper mention recent upgrades to the tiger enclosure, and my heart sank. Upgrades? I thought. What did they need to upgrade? "Hey look, there's the tiger." Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see the massive beast lounging in its habitat. The tiger looked regal and powerful, but there was something haunting in its amber eyes. A low growl rumbled through the air, causing a collective gasp from the crowd. "Did you hear that?" My voice trembled slightly. "Relax, it's just a tiger being a tiger," she replied, rolling her eyes at my anxiety. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the tiger was more than just an animal. It felt like a force of nature waiting to be unleashed. As we moved closer to the enclosure, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a dark figure lurking in the shadows just beyond the visibility of the crowd. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me feeling unsettled. "Emily, are you coming?" Sarah called, pulling me back to reality. "Yeah, I'm right behind you," I replied, but my mind was still lingering on that figure. Something about it felt wrong, like a storm brewing on the horizon. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to shake off the feeling. After all, it was just a school trip, right? What could possibly go wrong? As we wandered deeper into the Bronx Zoo, the vibrant colors of the animals surrounding us felt like a kaleidoscope of wonder. My classmates were buzzing with excitement, their laughter mingling with the chirping of exotic birds. I tried to immerse myself in the joy of the day, but a tightness in my chest reminded me that I was not completely at ease. I kept glancing back at the tiger enclosure, a dark shadow looming just beyond the glass, the weight of my anxiety growing heavier with each passing moment. "Emily, look at that parrot," my friend Sarah exclaimed, tugging on my sleeve. I turned my attention to the brilliantly colored bird, perched regally on a branch, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. "Yeah, it's beautiful," I replied, forcing a smile as I watched the parrot fluff its feathers. I felt a flicker of normalcy, but it was short-lived. The sound of a distant roar rippled through the air, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced around, noticing that while some kids were giggling and pointing at the nearby exhibit, others had frozen, their eyes wide with confusion. "Did you hear that?" I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. It's just the tigers. They're majestic, aren't they?" she said, dismissing my concern. I wanted to agree to share in her excitement, but something gnawed at me. I turned my gaze back toward the tiger enclosure, where a zookeeper was animatedly talking to a small group of visitors. "The renovations have made the enclosure more secure, but we're always on alert," he said, his tone light. "These big cats can be unpredictable." Unpredictable? I couldn't help but think, my heart racing. I felt the urge to move closer to hear more of what he was saying, but my feet felt glued to the ground. It was then that I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting behind the enclosure just beyond the sight of the visitors. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me with an unsettling sense of foreboding. "Come on, Em. We're going to see the lions next," Sarah called, pulling me towards the exit of the exhibit. I hesitated, glancing back one more time at the tiger enclosure. The zookeeper had moved on, and the area seemed eerily quiet now, as if the very air had thickened with tension. As we made our way to the lions, the chatter of my classmates faded into the background. I felt like I was in a bubble, my mind racing with thoughts that wouldn't settle. What was that figure? Why had it felt so wrong? I turned to Sarah, trying to shake off the chill that had crept into my bones. "Did you see that guy by the tiger exhibit?" I asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "What guy?" she replied, her brow furrowed in confusion. "The one who was lurking in the shadows?" I insisted, my heart pounding. "Are you sure you weren't imagining things?" "It's just a zoo, Emily. Nothing bad is going to happen," she said, rolling her eyes dismissively. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The day continued to unfold, each exhibit a new distraction, yet my mind remained focused on that unsettling moment. We stood in front of the lion's den, the majestic beasts lounging lazily in the sun, and while my classmates oohed and awed, I felt the weight of my anxiety clinging to me like a heavy cloak. "Look, they're so cool," Sarah exclaimed, her excitement infectious. I forced a smile, but my heart wasn't in it. Just then, another roar echoed through the park, louder this time, and the ground seemed to vibrate beneath our feet. The laughter of the other students faltered for a moment, replaced by a blanket of silence that felt all too eerie. "Did you hear that?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, it's just the lions. They're really loud," Sarah replied, shrugging it off. But I could see the uncertainty flickering in her eyes, mirroring my own. I glanced around, my instincts screaming that something was about to go horribly wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it could be. As we moved to the next exhibit, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Whatever was lurking in the shadows had not yet revealed itself, but I could sense that this day was far from ordinary. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something dark and unpredictable, a prelude to chaos that was waiting to unravel just beneath the surface. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and fear as I clutched Jake's hand tightly, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The cheerful chatter of my classmates transformed into a cacophony of screams and frantic shouts as the world around us spiraled into chaos. Everything happened in a blur. One moment we were standing in front of the majestic tiger enclosure, and the next, a terrifying crash shattered the momentary calm. "Emily, what's happening?" Jake's voice trembled, and I could feel his small hand growing slick with sweat in mine. "Stay close to me," I shouted over the noise, trying to keep my voice steady even though dread gripped my insides. I glanced back at the enclosure, my stomach lurching as I saw the tiger, a magnificent beast with fiery orange fur and piercing eyes, leap over the shattered remnants of its cage. The ground shook beneath the force of its powerful paws, and my instincts screamed at me to run. "Everyone stay calm. Follow the teachers." A voice boomed, but it was drowned out by the panic surrounding us. Students were scattering in every direction, some tripping over each other in their desperate attempts to escape. I could see the fear etched on the faces of my classmates as they darted past, their carefree excitement from earlier completely erased. "Emily, what do we do?" Jake's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to him, forcing a reassuring smile. "We need to find a safe place, Jake. Let's go." I pulled him toward a nearby pavilion, hoping it would offer some protection from the chaos unfolding around us. As we ducked inside, I could hear the distant roars of the tiger mingling with the frantic shouts of the zookeepers trying to regain control of the situation. "Is it safe here?" Jake asked, his voice small and shaky. "I think so," I replied, scanning the area. The pavilion was relatively empty, a few other students huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. I wanted to comfort Jake, to tell him everything would be okay, but the knot in my stomach tightened with every passing second. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I spotted that dark figure again, the one I had seen lurking behind the enclosure earlier. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, moving with an eerie calmness as he walked deeper into the zoo. My breath hitched in my throat. Who was he? What was he doing here? "Emily, look." Jake pointed toward the entrance of the pavilion, where a group of teachers had gathered, trying to organize a plan. "Shouldn't we go help?" "No, we need to stay here until it's safe," I insisted, my voice trembling. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew we couldn't risk being caught in the open. The sound of the tiger's growl echoed through the air, sending chills down my spine. As the minutes dragged on, the commotion outside seemed to intensify. I could hear the sirens wailing in the distance, growing closer by the second. The teachers were shouting instructions, but all I could focus on was the figure. He moved with purpose, disappearing behind the trees, and I felt a strange urge to follow him, to uncover the mystery of his presence. "Emily?" Jake's voice broke through my thoughts again. "What's happening? Why are we just sitting here?" I don't know, Jake. I just want to keep you safe," I admitted, my heart aching for my younger brother. He looked so small and vulnerable, and I felt an overwhelming wave of protectiveness wash over me. "Can we go find Mom?" he asked, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, we will. I promise." "Just hold on a little longer," I said, squeezing his hand tighter, trying to channel all my strength into that simple gesture. I could feel the weight of my fear pressing down on me, but I couldn't let it consume me, not now. Then, just as I thought we might have a moment to breathe, another roar erupted, closer this time. The ground seemed to shudder beneath us, and I glanced at the entrance, my heart racing. "Jake, stay behind me," I whispered, my voice barely above a tremble. The chaos outside grew louder, and I felt the urge to flee surge within me. But I couldn't leave Jake behind. I had to protect him no matter what. As the sounds of panic escalated, I knew that we were on the brink of something unimaginable, and I could only hope that we would find a way to escape the terror that was unfolding around us. Panic surged through the air like a tidal wave as I gripped Jake's hand tighter, my heart racing. The chaos around us was almost surreal, screaming children, frantic parents, and the echoing roar of the tiger that had shattered the fragile peace of the zoo. We need to find a safe place. I shouted over the noise, my voice barely rising above the cacophony. Jake nodded, his wide eyes reflecting both fear and confusion. "Where do we go?" he asked, his voice trembling. I searched the throng of terrified visitors for any sign of our classmates, but it felt like the crowd had swallowed them whole. "Let's head toward the food court," I shouted back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I knew that it was a central point in the zoo and might have more staff to help us. As we maneuvered through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of zoo staff rushing toward the animal enclosures, radios crackling with frantic commands. "Contain the area. Secure all exits," one shouted, but their words faded as we pressed on. It felt like we were in a nightmare, and I could hardly swallow the lump of fear rising in my throat. Suddenly, I spotted the dark figure again, standing ominously against a cluster of trees. My stomach dropped. His earlier smirk sent shivers down my spine. Why was he still here? I turned to Jake, who was now looking in the same direction. "Do you see him?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Yeah, he's just standing there," Jake replied, his voice wavering. "What's he doing?" "I don't know, but we should keep moving," I urged, pulling him closer as I continued to scan the area for a way out. The anxiety was palpable, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. "Just stay by my side, okay? We'll be fine." As we neared the food court, I heard a loud crash, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. My heart raced again as I glanced back toward the tiger's enclosure, now a scene of utter chaos. People were running in every direction, and I could see a few zoo employees trying to usher visitors away from the danger. A woman stumbled, and I instinctively reached out to help her, but she was already rushing past us, her face pale with fear. "Emily, look!" Jake exclaimed, and I followed his gaze to the food court entrance, where a group of students from our class had gathered, their faces a mix of terror and confusion. "Let's go," I shouted, leading Jake toward them. As we ran, I felt a surge of relief wash over me when we finally reached our classmates. Sarah, one of my closest friends, was there, her eyes wide as she hugged her little brother tightly. "Thank goodness you're okay," she exclaimed, her voice cracking. "Did you see the tiger?" I shook my head, breathless. "No, but it's gone. We need to stay together until they get this under control." "Where's Mr. Thompson?" Jake asked, looking around. "He was just behind us." I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "I don't know. We should try to call him." Just as I pulled out my phone, I caught sight of the figure again, lurking just outside the food court, his gaze fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine and I quickly turned my back to him, focusing on my friends. "Okay, everyone, we need to stick close," I said, trying to sound more authoritative than I felt. "If we see any staff, we should ask them what to do next." The air was thick with tension as we huddled together, the sounds of sirens and chaos continuing to echo around us. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, making me hyper-aware of every noise and movement. My heart pounded as I glanced around, making sure we were still safe. "Emily," Sarah whispered, her voice low, "what if that tiger comes this way?" I swallowed hard, trying to mask my own fear. "They'll contain it, they have to. Just stay close to me, okay?" I could hear the tremor in my own voice, the anxiety gnawing at my insides. But as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that the dark figure was still watching, lurking just beyond our sight, waiting for the right moment to make his move. The chaos of the zoo still echoed in my mind, a cacophony of screams and the thunderous roar of the tiger that had shattered the day. My heart raced as I clutched Jake's hand tightly, our breaths shallow and quickened. We had managed to escape the immediate panic, but I couldn't shake the feeling of the mysterious figure watching us. He had been lurking in the shadows, his smirk haunting me like a ghost I couldn't outrun. As the adrenaline faded, a new determination took hold. "We have to find out who that guy is," I said, my voice more resolute than I felt. Jake looked up at me, his eyes wide and anxious. "But what if he comes back?" I knelt down to his level, squeezing his shoulder gently. "We'll be careful. We can't let fear control us. Besides, we're not alone. I'll talk to some of my friends. They must have seen him too." With Jake reluctantly in tow, I made my way through the chaos of the zoo. The sounds of sirens still blared outside, and the air was thick with fear. I spotted a few of my classmates huddled together near the entrance, their faces pale. Guys. I called out, waving them over. Megan, one of my closest friends, rushed over, her brown hair bouncing with each step. Emily. Thank God you're okay, she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around me. Did you see that tiger? I thought we were done for. It was terrifying, I admitted, my voice dropping. But there's something else we need to talk about. That guy, the one lurking behind the enclosure. I think he's connected to this. Megan's expression shifted from relief to confusion. What do you mean? I saw him earlier and he was just there. He didn't seem scared at all when the tiger escaped. It's like he wanted it to happen. I looked around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. I think he's part of something bigger, maybe those animal rights protests I heard about. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. You're right, said Liam, another friend who had been quietly listening. I heard someone talking about it in class. There have been protests against the zoo for months now. Maybe he's trying to expose something. Just then, the distant sound of a loudspeaker interrupted our conversation. Attention everyone. Please remain calm and proceed to the designated exits. The zoo is now under lockdown. Great, I muttered. We're stuck here. Not if we can help it, Megan said, her eyes gleaming with determination. We should investigate. We need to find that guy and figure out what he's up to. Against my better judgment, I nodded. The thought of confronting the figure both terrified and excited me. Okay, but we have to be smart about it. We can't just walk up to him. We made our way to the area where I had last seen him. The zoo felt eerily quiet now, the absence of laughter and the presence of fear hanging heavy in the air. Shadows danced under the dim lights, and my heart raced as we approached the tiger enclosure once more. Stay close, I whispered, scanning the area for any sign of the figure. Just as I was about to turn back, I caught a glimpse of that familiar silhouette lurking behind a nearby tree. My stomach dropped. There. I pointed, my voice barely above a whisper. The others froze, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. What do we do now? Jake asked, his voice trembling. We confront him, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We have to know what he wants. As we moved closer, the figure stepped into the light and my breath caught in my throat. There was something unsettling about his presence. It was as if he thrived on the chaos he had created. Well, what do we have here? He said, a twisted smile creeping across his face. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking but firm. What do you want? He chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing, young lady, but I suppose you deserve to know. You see, I'm here to reveal the truth about this place. His words hung in the air and I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind raced with questions. What truth? What had he done? And why was he looking at me like that? Stay back. Megan shouted, stepping in front of Jake protectively. Don't worry, he replied, raising his hands mockingly as if to show he meant no harm. I'm not here to hurt anyone. But this zoo? It deserves to be exposed for what it truly is. The tension between us thickened, and I realized that our search for answers had led us straight into a web of darkness I had never anticipated. As I stood there, heart racing, the chaos of the zoo around me felt surreal. My friends and I had cornered the figure in a secluded part of the zoo, the sunlight barely filtering through the dense foliage, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I could feel the weight of fear hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. The figure, his face partially obscured by a hood, seemed unfazed by the panic that had erupted just moments ago. You think you're some kind of hero? I spat, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. You let that tiger loose. People could have been killed. He chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Hero? No, Emily. I'm not a hero. I'm just a messenger. The zoo is a prison for these animals and they deserve to be free. His eyes glinted with a manic intensity, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was enjoying this moment, this confrontation. Free? You put everyone in danger. My voice cracked. I could see Jake behind me, his small frame trembling, eyes wide with confusion and fear. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm for his sake. What do you want from us? The truth, he replied, stepping closer, his demeanor shifting from threatening to oddly serene. You're scared, Emily? But your fear, it's deeper than this day. You know it. I felt my heart drop. How could he possibly know? I had buried my past so deep, hidden it beneath layers of normalcy. What do you mean? I whispered, trying to mask the quiver in my voice. The figure smiled, a twisted smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think the tiger is the real threat here? Look inside yourself. Remember that day at the park when you were 7? The dog? You've never really moved past it, have you? I felt the blood drain from my face. The memory surged back, uninvited. A fluffy golden retriever barking, lunging toward me. I had fallen, scraping my knees, and the panic that had consumed me then returned in an instant, squeezing my chest like a vice. "Stop it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't hide from it," he pressed, taking another step forward. "Just like you can't hide from the truth about this zoo. It's a facade, Emily. And I'm the one pulling back the curtain." Before I could respond, the sound of sirens echoed through the air, growing louder with each passing second. The figure's smirk faded as he glanced over his shoulder, realizing his time was running out. "They won't believe you," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But you will remember. You'll remember this day and you'll remember the fear." I felt a surge of adrenaline as the police arrived, rushing toward us with authority. They shouted for the figure to surrender, but he just laughed, a wild, desperate sound. "You think this is over? This is just the beginning." With that, he turned and bolted into the dense foliage. I felt a rush of panic as the officers pursued him, but a part of me was frozen, captivated by his words. I had never been one to shy away from my fears, yet here I stood, paralyzed by the weight of what he had revealed. "Emily." Jake's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I turned to him, and in that moment I realized I had to protect him. "We need to get out of here." Nodding, I grabbed his hand, forcing my legs to move. As we hurried towards the exit, the sounds of chaos began to fade, replaced by the distant wails of sirens and the chatter of zoo staff. My mind raced with thoughts of the figure's words. I felt a mix of anger and clarity. Once we were outside, the fresh air hit me like a wave, washing away some of the suffocating dread. But the weight of the day lingered. I could see my classmates gathering, their faces a mix of relief and confusion. The tiger was back in its enclosure, but the chaos had left an indelible mark. As the police apprehended the figure, I watched, my heart still racing. I had faced my fears before, but this was different. I was shaken, but I knew one thing: I would not let this day define me. I would confront my past and the fears that still haunted me. "Are you okay, Em?" Jake's small voice broke through my thoughts again, bringing me back to reality. I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I think I will be." But as I looked back at the zoo, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The wildness of nature had revealed its secrets today, and I knew that it would return, echoing in my mind long after the escape was over.